$40 billion. That is the exact price tag of a single assumption. On a freezing Tuesday morning at JFK International, one gate agent made a choice. She looked at a man in a grey hoodie, saw his skin color, and decided he didn't belong in first class. She thought she was protecting the airline's image. Instead, she was staring into the eyes of the man who owned the software her computer was running on. Within 45 minutes of him being denied boarding, the global markets bled out. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of Elias Thorne, the gatekeeper who blocked him, and the most expensive mistake in aviation history. Buckle up. The turbulence starts now. The heating vents inside JFK's Terminal 4 were rattling, fighting a losing battle against the biting November wind whipping against the glass tarmac walls. It was 5:45 a.m. The air smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Elias Thorne shifted his weight from one foot to the other, adjusting the strap of his battered leather duffel bag. To the casual observer, and specifically to the security personnel scanning the crowd, Elias looked like a nobody. He was wearing a charcoal grey hoodie that had seen better days, loose-fitting track pants, and a pair of beat-up sneakers. He looked like a tired college student returning home for Thanksgiving, or perhaps an exhausted musician coming off a failed tour. He was neither. Elias Thorne was the founder and CEO of Stratum Logic, a back-end cloud computing conglomerate that quietly ran 30% of the world's logistics data. If you ordered a package, streamed a movie, or booked a flight, you were likely shaking hands with Elias's code. His net worth hovered comfortably around $11 billion. But today, Elias wasn't flying private. He wasn't surrounded by his security detail, and he wasn't wearing his customary bespoke Italian suit. Today was a field test. Stratum Logic was 72 hours away from closing a historic merger with Regal Atlantic Airlines. The deal, valued at $40 billion, would integrate Stratum's AI explicitly into Regal's booking and security infrastructure. Elias, a man obsessed with quality control, wanted to see the Regal experience from the ground level before he signed his name on the dotted line. He wanted to know how they treated their customers when the cameras weren't rolling. He had purchased a first-class ticket, seat 1A, under his legal name, but without his corporate title attached to the manifest. He wanted to be treated like a human being, not a walking bank account. He checked the time on his wrist. Under the sleeve of his fraying hoodie sat a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, a watch worth $2.6 million. It was the only hint of his reality, and it was currently hidden from view. Boarding will commence shortly for Flight 4022 to London Heathrow. The PA system crackled. We invite our first-class passengers and Diamond Medallion members to board at this time. Elias let out a slow breath, rubbing his tired eyes. He had been up for 30 hours coding a patch for the merger integration. He just wanted a glass of champagne and a lie-flat bed. He stepped out of the general seating area and walked toward the priority lane. He didn't notice the eyes of the gate agent tracking him like a hawk spotting a field mouse. He didn't see the sneer forming on her lips. He only saw the open gate and the promise of sleep. He was 5 steps away from the scanner when a hand shot out, blocking his path. The hand belonged to Patricia "Patty" Higgins. Patty had worked for Regal Atlantic for 22 years. She wore her uniform like armor. The navy blue blazer was perfectly pressed, the gold wings pinned exactly 3 inches below her shoulder, and her scarf tied in a knot so tight it looked painful. Patty was the self-appointed sheriff of Gate B12. She categorized passengers instantly. Businessmen meant respect, families meant noise, and people who looked like Elias meant trouble. "Excuse me." Patty's voice was sharp, loud enough to cut through the ambient chatter of the terminal. She didn't look him in the eye. She looked at his chest, then his shoes. The general boarding zones are not called yet. You need to wait." Elias paused, confused. He pulled his headphones down around his neck. "I'm sorry?" "Economy," Patty said, pointing a manicured finger toward the crowded holding area where hundreds of weary travelers stood. "Zone 4 and 5. You need to sit down. We are boarding first class." Elias smiled politely, a practiced expression he used in boardrooms when junior executives made errors. "I understand. I'm in first class." He stepped forward again, phone in hand to scan his digital boarding pass. Patty physically stepped in front of the scanner, blocking the QR code reader with her body. The silence that fell over the immediate area was heavy. The businessman behind Elias, a tall man in a trench coat named Arthur Vance, sighed loudly, checking his Rolex. "Sir," Patty said, her voice dropping an octave, dripping with condescension, "please do not waste my time. This line is for priority passengers. You are holding up the line." "I have a ticket," Elias said, his voice calm, though a flicker of irritation ignited in his chest. "If you'll let me scan, let me see it." She snatched the phone from his hand before he could offer it. She stared at the screen. It clearly displayed Elias Thorne. "Seat 1A, first class." For a rational person, this would be the end of the conflict. But Patty Higgins was not operating on rationality. She was operating on bias. She looked at the screen, then looked at Elias's hoodie, his tired eyes, his dark skin. The equation didn't balance in her mind. "This is a screenshot," she declared, handing the phone back with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "It's the Airline's app," Elias said, blinking. "It's live." "It's a screenshot of a manipulated ticket," Patty announced to the line behind him, playing to the audience. "We've been seeing a lot of this lately. People buying economy tickets and photoshopping first class passes to sneak on." "I assure you," Elias said, his voice hardening slightly, "I bought this ticket. If you check your manifest, I don't need to check the manifest to know you don't belong in seat 1A, Patty snapped. Seat 1A is a full-fare international ticket that costs $12,000. She looked him up and down again, letting her gaze linger on his sneakers. "Now, step aside before I call security. You are trespassing in a priority zone." Arthur Vance, the man in the trench coat behind Elias, leaned forward. "Look, miss, just scan his code. If it beeps, it beeps. We're all waiting." "I will not authorize a fraudulent boarding," Patty yelled, her face flushing pink. She turned back to Elias. "Back of the line. Now, or you're not flying at all." Elias stood very still. In his mind, he wasn't at gate B12 anymore. He was back in the server room at Stratum Logic. He was looking at a broken line of code. When code is broken, you don't force it. You isolate the variable. "I'm not moving," Elias said softly. "I paid for this seat. I am boarding this plane." Patty's eyes went wide. She reached for the phone on her desk. "Security to gate B12. I have a disruptive passenger refusing to comply with federal boarding procedures. He is aggressive and threatening staff." The word aggressive hung in the air like toxic smoke. Elias hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't moved his hands. But the narrative had been set. Within 90 seconds, the atmosphere at gate B12 shifted from annoyance to hostility. 2 airport police officers, bulky men with hands resting on their belts, jogged toward the counter. Behind them, the crowd had their phones out. The modern weapon of choice, the smartphone camera. Among the crowd was a young woman named Chloe, a Gen Z travel vlogger with 2.4 million TikTok followers. She had started recording the moment Patty snatched Elias's phone. She zoomed in on Elias's calm face, then panned to Patty's flushed, angry expression. "What's the problem here?" Officer Miller asked, stepping between Elias and the desk. "He's refusing to leave the priority lane," Patty said, pointing an accusing finger. "He has a fake ticket, and when I confronted him, he became belligerent. He lunged at me." Elias looked at the officer. "I didn't lunge. I haven't moved my feet in 3 minutes. I have a valid first-class ticket. She refuses to scan it because she doesn't believe I can afford it." Officer Miller looked at Elias. He saw the hoodie. He saw the defiance. He didn't see the billionaire. "Sir, I need you to step away from the podium," Miller said, his hand unclipping the strap on his holster. Not drawing the weapon, but signaling intent. "I just want to board," Elias said. "Scan the ticket. If it's fake, arrest me. If it's real, let me fly." "Sir, if you don't step back, you are being detained for disorderly conduct," the second officer barked. "This is insane," Arthur Vance shouted from the line. "Just scan the damn ticket." "Quiet," Officer Miller yelled at the passengers. He grabbed Elias's arm. "Let's go, buddy. You're done today." Elias felt the officer's grip tighten on his bicep. It was a familiar feeling, one he remembered from growing up in a neighborhood where hoodies made you a target. But he wasn't a helpless kid anymore. He was a man who could buy this airport if he really wanted to. He didn't resist. He allowed them to pull him out of the line. "You're making a mistake," Elias said, his voice deadly calm. He locked eyes with Patty Higgins. She was smirking. She felt powerful. She had won. She had protected her gate from the undesirables. "Get him out of here," Patty huffed, smoothing her scarf, "and ban him from the flight list. I want a lifetime ban on his record." As the officers dragged Elias toward the seating area to handcuff him, Elias reached into his pocket with his free hand. "Phone," the officer yelled, grabbing his wrist. "I am making one phone call," Elias said. "You can handcuff me after, but if you stop me from making this call, you will all be unemployed by lunch." There was something in his tone, a frequency of authority that bypassed the uniform and hit the primal part of the officer's brain. The officer hesitated. Elias tapped a speed dial number. It rang once. "Thorne?" the voice on the other end answered. It was Richard Sterling, the chairman of the board for Regal Atlantic Airlines. "Richard," Elias said, his voice echoing in the silent terminal. Everyone was listening now. "It's Elias. I'm at JFK, gate B12. "Elias? We're expecting you in London for the signing. Did you take the private jet?" "No, I flew commercial. Regal Atlantic." Elias stared directly at Patty Higgins, whose smirk was beginning to falter. "Richard, kill the deal." "Excuse me?" Richard's voice cracked over the speakerphone. "The merger, Stratum Logic and Regal Atlantic. It's dead. I'm pulling the plug, and I'm pulling the software license for your current booking system effective immediately." "Elias, wait, what is going on? You can't just—" "I'm currently being arrested at your gate because your agent decided a black man in a hoodie couldn't possibly be in first class. She accused me of fraud and called the police." The color drained from Patty Higgins's face so fast she looked like a ghost. "Who?" Richard screamed on the other end. "Who did this?" "Her name is Patricia Higgins," Elias said clearly. "And Richard, you have 10 minutes before I release a press statement. Short your own stock if you're smart." Elias hung up. He looked at the officer holding his arm. The officer's grip had gone completely slack. "Am I still under arrest?" Elias asked. The terminal was silent. Then a single notification sound pinged on someone's phone. Then another. Then a dozen. The stock market had just opened in New York. The silence that followed Elias's phone call was heavier than the jet fuel fumes drifting off the tarmac. It was the sound of a fuse burning down to a pile of dynamite. Officer Miller was the first to break the tableau. He slowly removed his hand from Elias's arm, his fingers uncurling like he had just realized he was holding a live cobra. He took a half step back, his eyes darting from Elias's impassive face to the frantic, reddening face of Patty Higgins. "What did you just do?" Patty whispered. Her voice trembled, but it wasn't with fear. Not yet. It was with indignation. She was still clinging to the wreckage of her authority. "Who was that on the phone? You think you can just fake a call to the chairman? You think we're stupid?" Elias didn't answer her. He looked at his watch. 9:32 a.m., he murmured. The algorithms should be reacting right about now. At the back of the line, a man in a blue business suit gasped. He was holding an iPad, staring at a Bloomberg terminal app. Oh my God! "What?" someone asked. "Regal Atlantic," the man shouted, looking up with wide eyes. "The stock, it just halted. Trading curb. It dropped 12% in 30 seconds. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. People began refreshing their finance apps. "It's down 15%. Wait, there's a news alert," a woman near the window announced, reading from her phone. "Rumors of failed merger between Stratum Logic and Regal Atlantic circulate following CEO detention at JFK. It's on Twitter. It's trending." Patty Higgins blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That's ridiculous. Just because of you?" "Not just because of me, Patricia," Elias said, finally addressing her. "Because of the market's lack of faith in a company that judges its partners by the color of their skin rather than the content of their portfolio." Suddenly, the computer terminal behind Patty let out a harsh digital screech. The screen flickered violently. The gate information display, the one showing Flight 402 to London, glitched, turned green, and then went completely black. Patty spun around, hammering on the keyboard. "What is this? The system is frozen. I can't see the manifest." "You won't be able to," Elias explained calmly. "Stratum Logic provides the API handshake for your boarding software. I wrote the original kernel myself 10 years ago. It has a kill switch for security breaches. I just triggered it remotely via my admin credentials." "You hacked us?" Patty shrieked, looking at the officers. "Arrest him. He's a cyber terrorist. He just hacked the airport." "I didn't hack anything," Elias corrected her. "I revoked your license. You are now using pirated software. Technically, you are the one breaking the law if you try to use that computer again." The chaos began to spread outward like a shockwave. It wasn't just Gate B12. Down the hall at Gate B14, a boarding announcement cut off mid-sentence. At the check-in counters upstairs, the baggage belt stopped moving. The kiosk screens flashing the Regal Atlantic logo turned into the dreaded blue screen of death. The entire digital nervous system of the airline was shutting down. "My screen is dead," the other gate agent, a younger man named Kevin, who had been silently watching in horror, whispered. "Patty, the whole system is down. We can't board anyone. The plane can't take off. The load sheet won't calculate." "Get on the radio," Patty screamed, sweat now beading on her forehead, melting her foundation. "Call operations. Tell them this man is sabotaging the flight." Officer Miller held up a hand. "Ma'am, I don't think he's sabotaging it. I think he owns it." Miller looked at Elias with a newfound respect, mixed with terrifying realization. "Sir, Mr. Thorne, if you really are who you say you are, can you turn it back on?" "I can," Elias said, "but I won't." "Why not?" Miller asked, desperate. "Because," Elias said, gesturing to the crowd of angry passengers, the stalled line, and the frantic Patty Higgins. "I want to see how she handles a crisis without a computer to hide behind." At that moment, Chloe, the TikToker, stepped forward. She held her phone up, live streaming to 40,000 viewers. The view count was climbing by the second. "Guys," Chloe said to her camera, then pointed it at Patty. "This is her. This is the woman who just cost the economy $40 billion because she didn't like a hoodie." Say hi, Patty. Patty covered her face with a boarding pass. Get that camera out of my face. Security. Seize her phone. But the security officers didn't move. They were too busy listening to their own radios, which were exploding with chatter about a system-wide blackout and executive alert level alpha. Arthur Vance, the businessman in the trench coat, stepped up to the podium. He looked at Patty with pure disdain. "You idiot," he spat. "I have a meeting in London that is worth $5 million. If I miss it because you wanted to power trip, I will sue you personally." "It's not my fault," Patty yelled, her voice cracking. "He refused to follow protocol." "Protocol?" Elias laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Let's talk about protocol, Patricia. Protocol dictates you scan the ticket. If it's valid, you smile and say, 'Welcome aboard.' Instead, you profiled me, you escalated, and now your airline's stock is in free fall. Do you know how margin calls work? Because the board members of Regal Atlantic are getting them right now." The phone on the desk behind the counter began to ring. It wasn't the standard internal line. It was the red emergency phone. Patty stared at it. She knew who called on that line. That line only rang for crashes, hijackings, or calls from the CEO. "Answer it," Elias commanded. Patty's hand shook as she reached for the receiver. She picked it up. "Gate B12, Agent Higgins speaking." The voice on the other end was so loud that Elias could hear it from where he stood. It was a roar of pure, unfiltered rage. "Higgins!" Patty flinched, holding the phone away from her ear. "Yes, sir?" It wasn't the chairman. It was the VP of Airport Operations, a man known as the Butcher, for how he handled staff reductions. "Who is at your gate?" the VP screamed. "Why is Richard Sterling calling me, asking why we arrested our liquidity partner? Why is the stock down 20%? Why are the systems dark? Sir, there was a passenger. He looked suspicious. He refused to—" "Is it Elias Thorne?" Patty swallowed hard. "He claims to be." "Claims to be. You imbecile. We just verified his ticket purchase. He bought it with an American Express Centurion card, linked to the Stratum Trust. You blocked the man who is supposed to save this company." "He was wearing a hoodie," Patty cried, tears finally spilling over. "He didn't look like a priority passenger." There was a pause on the other end, a silence more terrifying than the screaming. "You judged him by his clothes?" the VP said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Stay right there. Do not move. Do not speak. Do not breathe unless necessary. I am coming down there with legal. And Higgins, pray." The line went dead. Patty dropped the receiver. She looked up. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow, sick look of someone watching a tsunami approach the shore. Elias stood there, hands in his pockets. "Sounds like help is on the way." It took 7 minutes for the executives to arrive. In that time, the atmosphere at Gate B12 had devolved into a spectacle. Passengers from other gates had wandered over, drawn by the shouting and the growing crowd. Chloe's live stream had been picked up by CNN and was running on the airport televisions hanging from the ceiling. Patty Higgins had to stand there and watch herself on the news, labeled Airport Karen Crashes Market. The cavalry arrived in a phalanx of expensive wool suits. Leading the pack was Marcus Sterling, no relation to the narrator, but the son of the chairman, and the VP of Operations, an oversized man named Donald Graves. Flanking them were 3 lawyers and the station manager, who looked like he was about to vomit. Donald Graves plowed through the crowd, shoving aside the security barrier. He didn't even look at Patty. He went straight to Elias. Graves was sweating, his tie loosened. He looked at Elias, then at the officers still hovering nearby. "Mr. Thorne," Graves wheezed, extending a hand that Elias ignored. "Mr. Thorne, on behalf of Regal Atlantic, I cannot express how deeply sorry we are. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding, Mr. Graves," Elias said, his voice projecting clearly to the silent crowd. "Your agent understood perfectly what she was doing. She saw a black man. She decided he was a criminal. She weaponized the police against me." Elias pointed at Officer Miller. "Ask him. Ask him what crime I committed." Graves turned on his heel, facing the police officers. "Well?" "Report." Officer Miller straightened up, looking nervous. Well, sir. The agent claimed he was trespassing and lunging at her. Upon review of the situation, the suspect, Mr. Thorne, was compliant. He stood still. We were acting on the agent's distress call." "She lied," Elias said simply. "She filed a false police report because I questioned her bias." Graves turned slowly to Patty Higgins. Patty was shrinking against the wall, clutching her scarf as if it could strangle her and save her from this conversation. "Is this true?" Graves barked. "Did he lunge at you? He was aggressive in his tone," Patty pleaded. "He wouldn't move. I was just following security protocols regarding suspicious travelers." "Suspicious?" Elias interjected. "What was suspicious, Patty? My shoes? My skin? Or the fact that I didn't bow down when you told me to get to the back of the bus?" Patty stammered. "We have to be vigilant. You never know who—" "Stop talking!" Graves roared. "Just shut your mouth!" He turned back to Elias, his demeanor shifting instantly from bully to beggar. "Mr. Thorne, please. We can resolve this. We can fire her. Right now. Done. She's gone. But you have to turn the systems back on. We have 200 flights grounded globally. We are losing $10 million a minute." "And the merger?" Elias asked, raising an eyebrow. "The merger is we can still discuss it," Graves said, wiping his brow. "Richard is flying in. We can fix the terms. We'll give you a better split." Elias laughed. He walked over to the nearest row of seats and sat down, crossing his legs. "I don't think you understand, Donald. I don't need your money. I have plenty. What I need is for you to understand what just happened here." Elias gestured to the crowd, to the cameras, to the terrified gate agent. "You built a culture where she felt comfortable treating me like trash because she thought I was powerless. She thought she could humiliate me and go on her lunch break. The only reason you are apologizing is because I can crash your stock. If I were a school teacher, or a nurse, or a student, I'd be in handcuffs in the back of a squad car right now, wouldn't I?" Graves went silent. He couldn't answer, because the answer was yes. "I'm not turning the servers back on," Elias said. "Not until 3 things happen." "Name them," Graves said instantly. "Anything." "1," Elias said, holding up a finger. "Patricia Higgins apologizes, not to me, to every single person in this line for delaying their lives with her bigotry, and she does it on camera." Patty gasped. "I won't. That's humiliating." "More humiliating than being arrested for nothing," Elias shot back. 2, Elias continued. "I want a public resignation from your chief of diversity and inclusion because clearly they have failed at their job if she is your frontline standard." "Done," Graves said. "Consider it done." And 3, Elias stood up, walking close to Graves. "I want full access to your internal employee disciplinary logs for the last 10 years. I want to see how many other suspicious passengers Patty has banned. I want to audit your racism, Donald. And if I find a pattern, I'm not just cancelling the merger, I'm buying the airline." The crowd gasped. "You want to buy Regal Atlantic?" Graves asked, stunned. "The stock is cheap enough right now." Elias smiled coldly. "I could probably pick it up for pennies on the dollar thanks to this morning's crash. I think I'd make a great owner. The first thing I'd do is change the dress code. Hoodies allowed in first class." Graves looked at his lawyers. The lawyers looked at their phones. "Sir," one of the lawyers whispered to Graves, "the stock is down 35%. The board is calling for a suspension of trading. If he keeps the systems off for another hour, we enter Chapter 11 bankruptcy territory. We have no cash flow." Graves looked at Elias. He looked at Patty. He realized he had been checkmated by a man in track pants. "Higgins," Graves growled. Patty looked up, eyes red. "Sir?" "Get out from behind that counter." "But get out here!" Graves screamed. "And apologize to these people, or so help me God, I will have you prosecuted for corporate sabotage." Patty Higgins, the sheriff of Gate B12, the woman who had ruled her little kingdom with an iron fist for 2 decades, slowly walked out from behind the podium. She looked small. She looked weak. She stood before the crowd of angry, tired passengers. She looked at Chloe's camera. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. "I am sorry. I was wrong." "Louder," Elias said. "I didn't hear you." "I was wrong," Patty shouted, tears streaming down her face. "I judged him. I made a mistake. I am sorry." The crowd didn't cheer. They just stared. It was a moment of pathetic, raw justice. Elias nodded. He pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen 3 times. Behind them, the screen at Gate B12 flickered. The green text returned. The blue screen of death on the kiosks vanished, replaced by the Regal Atlantic logo. The baggage belt upstairs hummed back to life. "Systems are online," Elias said, pocketing his phone. "Board the plane." "Thank you," Graves exhaled, sagging with relief. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne. Please let us escort you to the lounge. We will prepare a private suite." "No," Elias said. He picked up his duffel bag. He looked at Patty, who was sobbing into her hands. "I'm not flying Regal Atlantic today," Elias said. "I'm taking my business elsewhere. And Donald, you better check your email." "Why?" Graves asked. "Because I just bought 51% of the outstanding shares during the dip," Elias said, looking at his watch. "I'm not a passenger anymore, Donald. I'm your boss." He turned to the police officers. "Gentlemen, you can escort Miss Higgins off the premises. I believe she's trespassing in a secure zone. She doesn't work here anymore." The glass doors of the Regal Atlantic headquarters in downtown Manhattan did not slide open for Elias Thorne. They were held open by nervous security guards who had been briefed that the new owner was entering the building. It was 2:15 p.m., just 4 hours after the incident at Gate B12. The timeline of the corporate world had accelerated to breakneck speed. Elias was still wearing the grey hoodie. He hadn't gone home to change. He wanted them to see him exactly as Patty Higgins had seen him. He wanted the contrast between his attire and their boardroom table to be a visual reminder of their failure. He took the elevator to the 45th floor, the executive suite. When he walked into the boardroom, the air was sucked out of the room. 12 men and women sat around a table made of mahogany that cost more than most people's houses. These were the board of directors of Regal Atlantic. At the head of the table sat Richard Sterling, the chairman, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in a single morning. To his right sat Donald Graves, the VP of Operations, looking smug, believing he had saved his own skin by throwing Patty Higgins to the wolves at the airport. "Mr. Thorne," Richard Sterling said, standing up shakily. "We have refreshments. Coffee? Water?" Elias didn't speak. He walked to the opposite end of the table and threw his duffel bag onto the polished wood. The heavy thud made the general counsel flinch. "Sit down, Richard," Elias said quietly. Richard sat. "By now," Elias began, his voice echoing in the silent room, "you have seen the SEC filings. As of 10:15 a.m., Stratum Logic, through various shell entities and direct purchases, acquired a controlling stake in this airline. I didn't just buy the dip. I bought the crater. He looked around the room. You are wondering why I did it. You think it's ego. You think I'm an angry man with too much money settling a score. Elias tapped the table with his index finger. And you're partially right. But that's not the whole story. Elias pulled a flash drive from his hoodie pocket and slid it down the long table. It spun and came to a rest in front of Donald Graves. Donald, Elias said, plug that in. Graves hesitated. What is this? It's the data I promised to audit, Elias said. While I was sitting in the back of that police car for 10 minutes waiting to be released, my AI, the Sentinel, was crawling through your internal servers. It was reading your emails, your memos, and your disciplinary logs. Graves paled. He plugged the drive into the presentation laptop. The massive screen on the wall flickered to life. It wasn't a chart of profits. It was a heat map of passenger complaints and denied boarding incidents, color-coded by race and age. Patty Higgins wasn't a rogue agent, Elias said, his voice hardening. She was your best student. The screen shifted to show an internal memo sent by Donald Graves 3 years prior. The subject line read, Risk mitigation in priority lanes. Elias recited the text from memory. Agents are encouraged to utilize visual profiling to minimize fraud. If a passenger does not fit the visual profile of a high net worth individual, additional screening is authorized. Better to offend one fraudster than lose revenue. The room went deathly silent. Visual profile, Elias repeated, tasting the words like sour milk. That is corporate speak for discrimination. You codified racism, Donald. You turned it into a key performance indicator. Patty blocked me because she was trained to think that a hoodie equals fraud. She was doing exactly what you told her to do. Graves stood up, slamming his hand on the table. Now wait a minute. That memo was regarding security. It was standard industry practice. It is illegal practice, Elias countered, and it exposes this company to class action lawsuits that will dwarf the $40 billion you lost today. Elias looked at Richard Sterling. Richard, you have a choice. You can go down with the ship, or you can help me scrub the deck. What do you want? Richard whispered. I want Graves gone, Elias said. No severance package, no golden parachute. Terminated for cause. Gross negligence and violation of federal civil rights laws. If he fights it, I release the emails to the New York Times. Graves looked around the room for support. He found none. The other board members were staring at the table, distancing themselves from the leper. You can't do this, Graves sputtered. I built this operation. You built a toxicity machine, Elias said. Pack your things, Donald. Security will escort you out. And Donald, if you try to take a company stapler, I'll have you arrested for theft. I hear the NYPD is very responsive today. 2 security guards, the same ones who had opened the door for Elias, stepped forward. They took Donald Graves by the arms. The man who had screamed at Patty Higgins just hours earlier was now being dragged out, kicking and screaming, a victim of the very culture of ruthlessness he had created. The rest of you, Elias said, turning to the remaining board members. You are all on probation, every single one of you. We are going to restructure, we are going to rebrand, and we are going to implement a new policy starting tomorrow. What policy? The General Counsel asked nervously. Blind booking, Elias said, and a complete overhaul of staff training. Every employee, from the baggage handlers to the CEO, will undergo bias training conducted by my team. And the dress code? It's gone. If a customer pays $10,000 for a seat, they can wear a swimsuit for all I care. We treat people based on their character, not their costume. Elias picked up his duffel bag. "Oh, and one more thing," he added, pausing at the door. "I want seat 1A on the flight to London tomorrow. Try not to arrest me this time." 6 months later. The transition from winter to spring usually brings a sense of renewal, a thawing of ice, and a promise of new beginnings. But for Patricia, Patty Higgins, the changing seasons only marked the passage of time in a life that had ground to a humiliating halt. She sat in the living room of her modest duplex in Queens. The shades were drawn tight, filtering the midday sun into a sickly yellow haze. The air inside smelled of stale tea and anxiety. On the coffee table, the mail had piled up like a snowdrift, a physical monument to her ruin. Patty didn't open the envelopes anymore. She knew what they contained. There were the overdue notices for her credit cards, the foreclosure warning from the bank, and, sitting atop the pile like a tombstone, a thick packet of legal documents from the firm of Vance, Sterling, and Associates. Arthur Vance, the businessman in the trench coat whom she had dismissed as a nuisance in the line that day, had not forgotten. He had sued her for defamation, emotional distress, and professional damages. He wasn't doing it for the money. He was wealthy enough. He was doing it, as his lawyer stated in a terrifyingly polite letter, to ensure that the defendant understands the cost of unchecked arrogance. Patty reached for the remote control, her hand trembling slightly. It was a nervous tic she had developed in the weeks following the incident. She turned on the television, keeping the volume low, as if afraid the neighbors might hear she was still alive. She flipped past the news channels. She couldn't watch them. For the first 2 months, her face had been everywhere. A passenger's cell phone video, the one filmed by that girl, Chloe, had been viewed over 400 million times. It had been remixed, memified, and dissected by body language experts. Patty Higgins was no longer a person. She was a cultural shorthand for bigotry. She was the gatekeeper. She stopped channel surfing when she landed on a daytime talk show. The host was interviewing a career counselor. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Rebuilding your brand in the digital age." Patty let out a dry, humorless laugh. There was no rebuilding this. Last week, she had finally mustered the courage to attend a job interview for a receptionist position at a dental clinic in Long Island, 40 miles away from the airport. She had dyed her hair brown and worn glasses, trying to mask the face that had crashed a stock market. The interview had gone well for the first 10 minutes. The dentist, a kind-looking older man, had been impressed by her 20 years of logistical experience. Then his office manager walked in with a file. She took one look at Patty, paused, and pulled out her phone. She whispered something to the dentist. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "Mrs. Higgins," the dentist had said, his voice suddenly cold. "I think we're done here." "But I haven't shown you my references," Patty had pleaded. "We don't need references," the office manager snapped, turning the phone screen toward her. It was a still image from the video. Patty's face, twisted in a sneer, pointing a finger at Elias Thorne. "We treat a diverse community here. We can't have you at the front desk. Please leave before we call the police. Please leave before we call the police." The words echoed in her living room. It was exactly what she had said to Elias. The karma wasn't just hitting her, it was hunting her. She looked down at her hands. They looked older. Without the navy blue uniform, without the gold wings, without the authority of the podium, she was just a lonely, bitter woman who had made the mistake of thinking power was a personality trait. She had served the system for decades, and when she broke, the system replaced her without a second thought. 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, the world looked very different. The sky was a piercing, impossible blue. Inside the cabin of Flight 402 to London Heathrow, the air was cool and smelled faintly of eucalyptus and expensive leather. This was no longer a regal Atlantic flight. The branding was gone. The stiff, military-style navy blues were gone. The napkins, the screens, and the uniforms now bore the sleek, minimalist logo of Horizon Air. Elias Thorne sat in seat 1A. He wasn't sleeping, though the lie-flat pod was inviting. He was working. His laptop was open, running a localized compiler. He was personally reviewing the code for the airline's new blind booking algorithm. The new system was revolutionary. It anonymized passenger data for gate agents. When a passenger approached the podium, the agent saw no name, no frequent flyer status, and no historical data until the boarding pass was scanned and verified. The computer made the decision, not the human bias. It was a system built on zero-trust architecture, designed to protect the passengers from the prejudices of the staff, and the staff from their own worst instincts. Elias paused, rubbing his eyes. He was tired, but it was a good tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from building something, not fighting it. "Mr. Thorne?" The voice was soft, interrupting his reverie. Elias looked up. Standing in the aisle was a flight attendant. Her name tag read Sarah. She was young, black, and wearing the New Horizon uniform, a charcoal grey tunic with silver accents. It was designed to be comfortable, practical, and stylish. It didn't look like a costume. It looked like professional attire for the 21st century. "I apologize for interrupting," Sarah said, holding a silver tray. "But I noticed your water was low. Would you like a refill? Or perhaps some coffee?" Elias smiled. "Water is fine, Sarah. Thank you." He watched her pour the sparkling water. Her hands were steady. There was no fear in her eyes. 6 months ago, the staff at Regal Atlantic walked on eggshells, terrified of the butcher Donald Graves or the rigid, punitive management style. Now, they walked with a different kind of energy. Elias had raised wages by 25% across the board in the first week of the takeover. He had fired the entire executive leadership team and promoted from within. Sarah placed the glass down on a coaster. "I also wanted to say thank you." Elias tilted his head. "For the water?" "No, sir," she said, her voice lowering slightly, becoming more personal. "For the change. I've been flying for 6 years. I used to hate coming to work. I used to be afraid that if I wore my hair natural, I'd get written up. I used to be afraid of the passengers and afraid of the management." She touched the silver Horizon pin on her lapel. "I'm not afraid anymore." Elias felt a lump form in his throat. This was the return on investment. The stock price had soared 60% since the acquisition, recovering the $40 billion and adding another 10 on top. But this, the look of dignity on an employee's face, was the real profit. "You're welcome, Sarah," Elias said softly. "You're the one doing the hard work. I just changed the logo." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile, and moved down the aisle to check on the other passengers. As Elias turned back to his laptop, a blur of motion caught his eye. Running up the aisle from the business class section was a young boy, maybe 10 or 11 years old. He was moving with the restless energy of a kid who had been sitting still for too long. He stopped abruptly at the front of the cabin, his eyes wide as he looked at the first-class pods. He was wearing a bright red hoodie, oversized and comfortable, with a comic book clutched in one hand. Normally, in the old Regal Atlantic days, a flight attendant would have intercepted him instantly. "Return to your seat. This cabin is restricted." The air would have been thick with rules. But today, no one yelled. Sarah, who was a few rows back, just watched him with a smile to make sure he didn't trip. The boy's eyes landed on Elias. He stared for a long moment, Then his jaw dropped. He looked at the laptop, then at Elias's face, then at the grey hoodie Elias was wearing. "Whoa," the boy whispered, stepping closer. "Are you him?" Elias closed his laptop lid. "Am I who?" "The glitch," the boy said, his eyes shining. "My dad told me about you. He said you're the guy who broke the internet with a boarding pass." Elias laughed. "The glitch? I haven't heard that nickname yet. I suppose I am." The boy pointed at Elias's chest. "You're wearing it. The hoodie." "I am," Elias said. He looked down at his own attire, the same charcoal grey hoodie that had caused a global financial meltdown. "It's comfortable, essential for long flights." "My teacher said you can't wear hoodies to work," the boy said, frowning. "She says it's not professional." Elias unbuckled his seatbelt and leaned forward, bringing himself to eye level with the kid. "What's your name, son?" "Leo." "Well, Leo," Elias said, his voice serious but kind. "You tell your teacher that professionalism isn't about what you wear. It's about how you treat people. You can wear a three-piece suit and be a failure of a human being. And you can wear a hoodie and change the world." He reached into his carry-on bag, which was stowed beneath the ottoman. He rummaged around for a moment and pulled out a small, velvet box. Inside was a lapel pin. It wasn't the standard plastic wings they gave to kids. It was a limited edition Horizon Air pin made of brushed titanium in the shape of a soaring falcon. "Come here," Elias said. Leo stepped closer. Elias pinned the falcon onto the boy's red hoodie. "This makes you an honorary pilot of Horizon Air," Elias said, "but it comes with a rule." Leo looked down at the shiny metal, entranced. "What rule?" "You have to promise me that when you grow up and become the boss of something, whether it's a company or a team or just your own life, you never look down on people. You look them in the eye. Can you do that?" Leo looked up. He nodded solemnly. "I promise." "Good man," Elias said, offering a fist bump. Leo bumped his fist, grinned, and turned to run back to his seat. Dad, look! The glitch gave me wings!" Elias watched him go, the red hoodie disappearing behind the curtain. He sat back in his seat, exhaling a long, slow breath. He turned his head to look out the window. Below them, the ocean was a vast, textured sheet of blue. Somewhere down there was the old world, with its Patty Higginses and its Donald Graveses, clinging to their hierarchies and their fears. But up here, at 35,000 feet, the air was clear. Elias Thorne, the boy from the neighborhood who was told he didn't belong, closed his eyes. He listened to the hum of the engines that he now owned, powering a plane filled with people who were treated like human beings. He had lost an hour of his time that morning in November. He had been humiliated. He had been handcuffed. But as he drifted off to sleep, Elias knew the truth. It was the best deal he had ever made. And that is how the arrogance of one person, empowered by a broken system, toppled a legacy. Patty Higgins thought she was just enforcing the rules, but she forgot the golden rule of the modern age. You never know who you are talking to. Elias Thorne didn't just buy an airline. He bought a lesson for the entire world. Value is not determined by appearance. Power is not determined by a uniform. And if you judge a book by its cover, you might just get crushed by the library. What do you think? Was Elias's reaction too harsh, or was it exactly what the company deserved? Have you ever been judged at an airport or a store based on how you looked? I want to hear your stories in the comments below. Let's expose the patties of the world together. If you enjoyed this story of massive corporate karma, smash that like button. It helps the algorithm more than you know. And hit subscribe so you don't miss our next story about a waiter who refused to serve a man in flip-flops, only to find out he owned the building. Thanks for watching. Stay humble, stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next one.